Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes, where we're taking deep dive into Edward Bernays' foundational 1928 work, Propaganda. This book, written almost a century ago, lays bare the mechanisms by which public opinion is shaped and managed, often without our conscious awareness. Bernays, who was actually Sigmund Freud's nephew, he essentially invented the field of public relations. And in this book, he makes this really startling claim, doesn't he, that the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society.
It's a bold statement right out of the gate. Bernays argues that there's this invisible government of influential people constantly molding our minds, our tastes, our ideas. And what's really fascinating, I think, is how he redefines propaganda. He tries to move it beyond those negative World War I feelings. He presents it as, well, a neutral tool, even a necessary one for organizing society. The book then systematically explores how this new propaganda, which is rooted in mass psychology, operates across all these different sectors: business, politics, women's activities, education, you name it. He emphasizes using media strategically, manipulating group instincts to get specific outcomes, while interestingly also advocating for an ethical practice of PR.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Bernays believed this invisible government wasn't sinister, but actually kind of a logical and even essential part of how a complex democracy functions. So let's dive into why he thought this hidden influence was necessary, starting with his, well, pretty provocative claim about organizing chaos.
Right. Bernays basically asserts that in a huge, complex society like ours, if every single citizen had to research every political, economic, or ethical question themselves, well, life would just become hopelessly jammed. So, society, almost out of necessity, he says, consents to have its choice narrowed by ideas that are brought to them through propaganda. He saw it as a natural adaptation.
That's quite a take, isn't it? He points to political parties as a key example. I mean, the Constitution didn't create them, but they popped up almost immediately just to narrow the choices, to make voting simpler and, avoid confusion. He felt that organization and direction are just crucial to prevent society from grinding to a halt.
And this need, he argues, was really turbocharged by technology. Think about it: the printing press, newspapers, railroads, the telephone, radio. Bernays, citing people like H.G. Wells, argued these things revolutionized how ideas spread. They allowed messages to hit huge audiences instantly, way beyond the old village community.
Yeah.
It effectively replaced that older model.
He really hammers home the complexity too, doesn't he? The multitude of cleavages, hundreds of social, political, economic, racial, religious groups, all with their own subdivisions. He'd pull examples from things like the World Almanac, just painting this picture of a really fragmented society.
Exactly. And he shows how these thousands of organizations, formal and informal, like your neighborhood bridge club or professional societies, they all interlace. An opinion someone gets in one group, say, as a Rotarian, tends to spread to the other groups they're part of. This intertwining structure, he believed, was how democracy organized its group mind and simplified its mass thinking. So he saw this book as his way of explaining that mechanism, how it's used to create public acceptance, and also to suggest some kind of evolving ethical code for it all.
Okay, so that brings us neatly to the new propaganda. Bernays talks about this shift, right? From King saying, "L'État c'est moi, I am the state to the Industrial Revolution," supposedly giving power to the people. But then he says a reaction set in. What was that reaction?
Well, the reaction was that the minority, the influential few, discovered they had a powerful help in influencing majorities. And that help was molding the minds of the masses. Bernays puts it bluntly. Propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government. He saw it as just a constant, inevitable part of modern life for anything important.
Now, the word propaganda today, it has a pretty negative ring to it, doesn't it? Sinister almost. But Bernays uses it neutrally. Can you maybe clarify his definition and why he thought it was, as he puts it, perfectly legitimate?
Absolutely. He actually points to dictionary definitions of his time. Things like any institution or scheme for propagating a doctrine or system or effort directed systematically toward the gaining of public support. He argues the original meaning got twisted during World War I. For Bernays, it's perfectly legitimate as long as it doesn't involve lies or isn't prejudicial to the common good.
Right, and he makes this point by looking at a typical New York Times front page from back then. He suggested that many big stories, which look like spontaneous events, were actually the result of conscious direction designed to sway public opinion.
Precisely. His definition of modern propaganda is quite specific: a consistent, enduring effort to create or shape events to influence the relations of the public to an enterprise, idea, or group. He stresses its universality, its continuous nature. He says it's regimenting the public mind, just like an army regiments soldiers. That phrase, regimenting the public mind, it's pretty striking. For Bernays, this was just how influence worked now. But for us, maybe it sounds a little controlling. How did he square that with democracy?
Well, he argues that even positive movements, charities, public health campaigns, they have to use propaganda. He says it's just as though they had tubes of toothpaste to sell. He felt that the, frankly, amazing success of propaganda during World War I really opened people's eyes to the possibility of regimenting the public mind, even in peacetime.
And that led to what he calls the new propaganda. This wasn't just about individuals anymore. It considered society's interlocking group formations and loyalties. It saw the individual as a cell organized into the social unit. He gives that great example of the velvet fashion industry. Remember, velvet was out, manufacturers were struggling. So instead of just advertising, they got an influential Parisian to subtly influence top designers like Lanvin and Worth. Then they arranged for high society women, countesses, to wear these velvet creations. American buyers in the media saw this, reported on it as a trend, a created circumstance, and suddenly, he says, what was at first a trickle of velvet became a flood.
So if propaganda is this, powerful engine steering our choices, who exactly are the drivers? Who are these new propagandists?
That's where the Public Relations Council comes in, the PRC. Bernays says power is often dictated by shrewd persons operating behind the scenes. The specialist, the PRC, has a two-part job. Interpret the client, an enterprise, an idea, to the public, and interpret the public back to the client. They're advisors, like lawyers, but focus specifically on those public contacts.
And he lays out their process, doesn't he? First, analyze the client's problem. Like maybe an orphanage's donations are down, so the PRC advises switching to a more modern cottage plan setup. Then, analyze the public different groups, demographics. Only then can you formulate policies and finally get the message out.
And he traces the origins of this role back to the early 1900s, to things like insurance scandals and the era of muckraking, that investigative journalism exposing corporate wrongdoing. Companies realized, oh, we're out of touch. He uses the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company as a prime example. They made a conscious effort to shift public perception, offering health surveys, advice, making their building a landmark. They eventually gained broad general acceptance.
He's really clear, though, that this isn't just ballyhoo or making things up. It's about understanding and expressing the client's true personality. That could be an oil company's fair labor practices, a bank president's integrity, even how polite department store clerks are. All of it shapes public perception.
Which naturally leads to the question of ethics, right? Bernays argues the ideal is pragmatic. Bring the producer and the public together, reduce friction, eliminate waste. He insists a PRC refuses a client whom he believes to be dishonest, a product which he believes to be fraudulent, or a cause which he believes to be antisocial. He states their business is not to fool or hoodwink the public, and materials should be clearly sourced.
Okay, so digging into this more. When he talks about understanding the group mind, what's the ultimate goal? Is it purely control?
Well, he says pretty directly, if you understand the mechanism and motives of the group mind, it's possible to, quote, control and regiment the masses according to our will without their knowing it. He explains that influencing leaders automatically influences their groups. Even when you're alone, your mind retains these patterns stamped by group influence. And he argues, controversially perhaps, that men are rarely aware of the real reasons which motivate their actions. Okay. You might think you bought a car for logical reasons, but Bernays says you're almost certainly fooling yourself. Maybe it's because your friend got one, or it's a status symbol, or your wife liked it. Propagandists, he says, must understand these true motives.
So it's a shift away from what he calls the old salesmanship, the direct command like, you buy O'Leary's rubber heels now. Instead, it's about this newer salesmanship that creates circumstances, stirs up psychological and emotional currents.
Yes, the piano example is perfect for this. Instead of just trying to sell pianos directly, the modern approach is to create the idea of needing a music room in the home. So you organize exhibitions with famous decorators, use fancy tapestries, invite influencers like musicians or society figures. Then you get architects to start including music rooms in their designs. The end result, the desire for a piano feels like it came from the customer themselves. It's a complete flip.
He also talks about that ivory soap sculpture competition. That was brilliant, wasn't it? It involved schools, kids, teachers, art world people, parents. It tapped into so many different motives, competition, creativity, pride, all linked back to a bar of soap.
It really did, and it all boils down to his core idea. Propaganda is predicated on sound psychology based on enlightened self-interest. like a railway boosting its own business by helping the communities along its tracks grow, or a bank offering investment advice so customers have more money to deposit. It's about finding that sweet spot where the client's goals align with what the public actually wants or needs.
And this understanding, he argues, led to huge shifts in business, moving away from that old public be damned attitude. Businesses realized they needed to bring the public into partnership, partly because of that muckraking journalism keeping them honest.
Exactly. And mass production created a problem, didn't it? You make all this stuff, you need to sell it consistently. Supply has to actively seek to create its corresponding demand. So businesses had to understand the public, their structure, personality, prejudices. Plus, with intense competition, public goodwill became vital for things like getting investment, floating stocks and bonds. You had to dramatize your company's personality.
He also points out this new competition, not just Ford versus Chevy, but entire industries fighting for the same consumer dollar. Stone versus wood for houses, oranges versus apples. Industries had to actively shape taste and standards, and he saw this as potentially positive, a way to bring better design, better art into everyday products. Similarly, he saw propaganda as essential for science making complex discoveries understandable and fostering public acceptance of progress.
The Public Relations Council's role, then, becomes advising on all sorts of policies, from major product lines down to, say, the uniforms clerks wear. That Dodge Victory 6 car launch, he describes the nationwide radio event with celebrities, the president's short speech reaching millions, that was his example of the future, a sugar-coated sales message.
He also covers handling crises, like false rumors. He contrasts a company that lost $1 million because of a rumor with the beech nut packing company. When a rumor spread their president might sell, he publicly refused, citing loyalty to the town. They even had a beech nut day. It completely neutralized the rumor far better than a simple denial could have.
Okay, let's pivot to politics. Bernays is pretty critical here, isn't he? He says the big political problem is getting leaders to actually lead. And he argues politicians' methods are just archaic and ineffective compared to business. He tells that story about a political speaking tour where it cost over $15 for every single voter they might have swayed. Just incredibly inefficient.
So politicians might understand people, but they lack the skill in mass distribution of ideas. Is that the gist?
Pretty much. Bernays says campaigns should be planned like big business ventures. Clear goals, honest platforms, scientific analysis of the public, proper budgeting, and crucially, integrated emotional appeals. He believed a real leader uses propaganda to lead the people, not just follow polls. He even quotes George Bernard Shaw saying a statesman should express the people's will like a scientist expresses natural laws.
And then he drops that really provocative idea, a secretary of public relations in the president's cabinet, someone to interpret America's goals, keep citizens informed, bridge that gap between government and the people. He calls it government by education, but clarifies it's enlightened expert propaganda.
Right, and he uses the example of Thomas Masaryk, the first president of Czechoslovakia, who apparently shifted their Independence Day celebration from a Sunday to a Monday just to get better press coverage. It shows the technique matters, even in nation building.
What about social change? How does propaganda fit in there?
Well, he points out that social services often rely on voluntary support from the wealthy, so they have to use propaganda constantly just to survive and function. He identifies inertia, people's resistance to change, as the main enemy. Propaganda is the tool to overcome that inertia by consciously directing public opinion. He gives a detailed example of the NAACP's campaign against lynching. They strategically held their convention in Atlanta, deep in the South, to give their message more weight. They carefully framed the event, involved diverse leaders, and managed to get their message reported even in the Southern press, building racial consciousness and solidarity.
I also notice how women's influence became really potent once they got organized and used propaganda effectively. They impacted legislation on welfare, working hours, public health, things like the Shepard-Towner bill. He argues women often focus their organized efforts on crucial issues that men might overlook.
And he applies this lens to education, too. He worried education wasn't getting the public interest it deserved. He thought educators often felt, well, undervalued compared to businessmen, which held them back from promoting their profession's importance. So he advocated for intelligent propaganda, college news bureaus, popularizing academic research like that Mayan calendar breakthrough. Even museums, he argued, should be active leaders and teachers, not just morgues, making art accessible, like adapting ancient vase designs for affordable modern China.
Okay, so we've covered the why and the who. Let's get into the how, the nuts and bolts. What tools did Bernays see propagandists using?
He basically says all forms of human communication are potential tools, but their value changes over time. He notes the public meeting was declining, people preferred getting news differently.
The newspaper was still huge, obviously, but he says their attitude changed.
Yeah, they moved from resenting propaganda to prioritizing news value. The editor, he felt, was generally independent. So the PRC's job wasn't just feeding press releases, it was about creating newsworthy events that would then compete for space. But he stresses, always state the source clearly, always present facts accurately.
And magazines were different.
Yes, magazines select content based on a consistent policy. They often act as propagandist organs themselves, promoting certain lifestyles or ideas like good housekeeping or specific aesthetics.
What about lectures or radio?
The lecture's main value, he thought, was its ripple effect, the broadcast or newspaper coverage reaching a wider audience, and radio. He saw it as one of the most important tools, a major competitor to newspapers for advertising, and potentially controllable by large groups pushing their viewpoints.
Now, his take on movies really stands out. He called the American motion picture the greatest unconscious carrier of propaganda in the world today. That's a strong claim.
It is. He believed movies standardized ideas and habits because they reflected, and maybe even amplified, popular culture and trends, unconsciously shaping norms. He also talks about using personality as a tool. It could be misused. He mentions President Coolidge awkwardly posing in an Indian headdress. But used well, it offers vivid dramatization. Think of a powerful leader whose actions embody their message. But, he warned, the projected personality must align with their real character and goals.
So Bernays wraps up by saying the public is getting wise to these methods, right? But does he think propaganda will lose its power?
Not at all. He argues people must respond to basic appeals, the need for food, fun, beauty, leadership. So propaganda will never die out. He believed intelligent people needed to accept it as the modern tool for fighting for good causes and helping, in his words, bring order out of chaos.
It's really quite a framework he built back in 1928. Still feels relevant today.
Absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Bernays believed that understanding and ethically using these principles wasn't about manipulation for its own sake. It was about enabling intelligent men to fight for productive ends in our complex world. Which leaves us with a question, doesn't it? In today's incredibly fragmented media landscape, with social media, filter bubbles, is Bernays' invisible government of persuaders actually more powerful now, or maybe less so than it was back in his time?
That's definitely something to think about. And that wraps up our deep dive into propaganda by Edward Bernays. We hope this exploration has given you a fresh perspective on the unseen forces that shape our world, and perhaps even your own daily decisions. Thank you for joining us.